Welcome to Washington Hospital Today, dedicated to informing residents about healthcare topics and issues. Through programs featuring community forums and free health and wellness classes, our goal is to empower community members with the information needed to make informed health decisions. Washington Hospital has been providing healthcare to the residents of the Washington Township Healthcare District for the past 60 years. Today's presenter is Lorie Roffelsen. Lorie is a clinical registered dietitian.
Well, welcome to Diabetes Matters. My name is Lorie Roffelsen. I'm a dietitian here at Washington Hospital, and I'm also a certified diabetes educator. And our topic this month is heart-healthy diet and diabetes and how that works together. And February is Heart Health Month, so it's a timely topic to take on. And also, it's the beginning of the year, and this is kind of the time when we make New Year's resolutions to maybe eat healthier or exercise more or stop smoking or get more sleep. That's my resolution every year, which I try to work on. And for some, it is improving their diet. And so I'm going to use the word diet tonight, but I really hate the word diet at the same time because it implies that it's something temporary or something restrictive or something that you're just going to do for a while, but it's not something you're going to kind of adopt and continue forward using. So I'm going to also use the term meal pattern because a lot of the diets we're going to talk about tonight are really a pattern of eating or that's healthy and balanced and something you can sustain and do your whole life. So today we're going to talk about why diabetes increases your risk for cardiovascular disease. And we're going to compare some of the popular dietary patterns that you've maybe heard about that are proven to be both heart healthy and diabetes friendly. And then review current diet recommendations to reduce risk for cardiovascular disease. So there's some kind of sobering statistics about diabetes and heart disease. And one of the statistics I read is at least 68% of people over 65 that have diabetes will die from some form of heart disease, and 16% die of stroke. So it's a high percentage. And adults with diabetes are 2 to 4 times more likely to die from heart disease than adults who do not have diabetes. But the American Heart Association considers diabetes one of those major controllable risk factors for cardiovascular disease, since there are things you can control about your diabetes that can reduce your risk for heart disease. So there are some conditions that seem to follow with diabetes that raise your risk for heart disease. So one of them is high blood pressure, or also called hypertension. And this has long been recognized as a major risk factor for cardiovascular disease and also for kidney disease. And if you have both hypertension and diabetes, and it's common to have that combination, that doubles your risk for cardiovascular disease. Another condition that is associated with diabetes is abnormal cholesterol numbers or high triglyceride levels. So patients with diabetes often have unhealthy cholesterol levels or other lipid disorders that are associated with insulin resistance. So you may have high LDL, and we call that the bad cholesterol, or you may have low HDL, which is also referred to as the good cholesterol, or you may have high triglycerides, which are also known as a storage form of fat. So if we eat excess calories, the body wants to store those calories and it converts them to a storage form of fat called triglyceride. So other conditions associated with diabetes obesity. Now I'm talking primarily type 2 diabetes. So if you can lose weight, that often can improve or decrease your risk for heart disease, decrease insulin levels in your blood, and also increase your body's sensitivity to the insulin that you're still making. And lack of physical activity is also a condition associated sometimes with diabetes. So that's another modifiable risk factor if you can increase and pick up activity. So exercising, and especially if that leads to some weight loss, can prevent or delay the onset of type 2 diabetes, can help reduce your blood pressure, and often it can also reduce your cholesterol and maybe risk for heart disease and stroke. So the dietary patterns we're going to talk about in a minute, these are guidelines that were looked at and compiled by the American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology. So, and they're also aligned with dietary guidelines for Americans. So that's a committee that reviews all the current literature, studies, and puts recommendations out to the general public. And they review those studies and review that information on a periodic basis, because sometimes new information comes to light or new studies that make us want to change or improve those recommendations. What I like about the dietary patterns I'm going to show you, or the diets I'm going to show you, is they really have evolved from focusing on one nutrient like just sodium, talking about sodium or talking about fat, and just talking more about real foods. So it's a little bit easier to translate information to people. So it's real foods instead of just talking about nutrients. What they all share, the diets we're going to talk about, they all emphasize, because these will reduce your risk for heart disease, is eat your vegetables, eat your fruits, try to incorporate more whole grains. If you eat dairy, low-fat dairy is preferred. Poultry and fish are leaner proteins if you eat animal protein. Try to consume legumes, which are beans, peas, and lentils for their nutrient value. Use non-tropical liquid plant oils to cook with. And eating nuts is also, you can or you don't have to, but those are considered also heart healthy or nutritious. Things to avoid in general are sweets and sugar sweetened beverages. So that would be like soda, sweetened iced tea, any kind. Would also kind of refer to juices. I mean, most of the recommendations say try to eat whole fruit and really limit your juice consumption. Limit red meats and processed foods. And processed foods you should limit because they typically have added sodium, added sugars sometimes, and they also have added fats, and often they're not healthy added fats. So if you look at the ingredient label and see what type of fats are added, in manufacturing there's some fats that are less expensive to use, like some of the tropical oils like palm oil and palm kernel oil. So you might see those often in, especially like baked goods like cookies and crackers and things like that. And being processed, often they also lack fiber. What all the recommendations also agree on are what are heart healthy fats. What you want to emphasize or use most of the time are the good fats on the left side of the screen, because they don't have, monounsaturated fats basically have a neutral effect on the heart. They don't raise your cholesterol levels, and they may, if they replace other types of saturated fat, they may help lower your cholesterol levels. And they provide some essential fats that your body doesn't make. So the source of monounsaturated fats are primarily liquid plant oils. Certain types of fatty fish are high in omega-3 fats, nuts and seeds. And there's other food examples here, avocado. So those are all heart-healthy types of fat, where the recommendations probably in like 70s and maybe into the 80s was low-fat diet. If you are primarily using monounsaturated or these heart-healthy fats, it's not as important to eat fat-free or low-fat. You still want to watch your fat intake if you're trying to lose weight or maintain your weight, because the calories are there whether it's a heart-healthy fat or not heart-healthy fat. So still watch your, how much oil or fat you use, but you don't have to eat a fat-free diet to eat heart-healthy. Then the bad fats, the saturated fats, we want to really limit, because we know saturated fat has the most impact on our LDL or bad cholesterol. So that will raise your total cholesterol, your LDL cholesterol, and that's what can lead to plaque formations in our arteries. So sources of saturated fat would be foods often of animal origin. If they're fattier cuts of animals, like fattier cuts of beef, they have more saturated fat than a leaner cut. If you've heard the recommendation to eat more fish, one of the reasons for that is that fish is very low in saturated fat. So it has a lot of the monounsaturated or polyunsaturated healthy fats, but not a lot of the saturated fat. And there's some other food examples of foods high in saturated fat, like cheese, meats, butter, full-fat dairy products. So those are foods to limit. And then our ugly fats, the hydrogenated oils, and the history of hydrogenated oils, where manufacturers like to increase the shelf life and the shelf stability of foods, and so they hydrogenated or made solid fats out of vegetable oils. And that did extend the shelf life of products, but we found through research that they're also very unhealthy for the heart and increase inflammation in the body. They can decrease your HDL level if you eat a lot of trans fat, can raise your LDL cholesterol. So trans fats should be minimized or avoided as much as possible in the diet. So there's our fats. So now that we've talked about foods that are typically recommended to eat, I just wanted to point out some of the top 6 most consumed food subcategories in the US that make up about 43% of all the calories we consume. So it's our things like burgers, sandwiches, tacos, desserts and sweets. SSB refers to sugar sweetened beverages, starches like rices and pastas, grain-based dishes, chips, crackers, and snack foods, and pizza. So we get the majority of our calories just from these 6 food groups. So if you kind of are mindful of that and watch your portions, if you do consume, say, pizza or pasta or desserts, that will help cut your calories right there, if you're just kind of aware that these are the groups that do have kind of the calorie-dense options in them. So we're going to talk about the USDA food pattern, the DASH diet, Mediterranean diet, vegetarian and vegan eating patterns, and then also American Heart Association dietary pattern. So let's talk first about the USDA. The USDA is the source of the food guide pyramid and the 4 food groups. It started in the 1940s after World War II, when there was scarcities, and they came out with guidelines called the Basic 7, because there were shortages of food and they wanted to make sure everybody ate at least the basic foods to get all their nutrients. And the Basic 7 evolved into the 4 food groups, or the Basic 4. So this was introduced in the 50s, and they had suggested servings for each group, but they were all kind of equally important in this representation. Then in 1992, they wanted to update the basic four, and they came out with food guide pyramid, with the idea that the foods at the bottom of the pyramid should be emphasized more, and as you eat from the food groups in the smaller parts of the pyramid up towards the top, that you reduce your servings, reduce your portion sizes, and eat fewer servings. And that worked for quite a number of years. They didn't update it until 2005 and replace it with this very abstract pyramid, which when my daughters were young, I would go into their classroom and teach them about, nutrition. And actually using that pyramid was very difficult. It was a little bit hard because it is abstract. But each of the colors in the pyramid represented approximately like the percentage or the importance of each food group. So I don't know if you could see like the yellow, there's a yellow line that's supposed to represent fats, and that was a very skinny group. So that was kind of how they tried to teach that. But that didn't last too long, and then in 2011, they replaced the pyramids with Choose MyPlate. So you can go to this website, choosemyplate.gov, and it's definitely a little bit more easy to translate the information using this visual versus a pyramid. And if you go to the website and you put in you can kind of tailor it to your age, gender, and your activity level. So if you put that information in, it will give you a suggested calorie level that you should try to follow. And linked with that are the number of servings from each group that you could try to, follow in a day. So the main points of the USDA MyPlate is try to choose a variety of foods from each food group. So this is kind of tailored to, children, adults, the general public. It's not like a strict heart healthy diet, but it really does follow, I think in general, heart healthy guidelines. Limit saturated fats, sodium, and added sugars. Focus on whole fruits instead of juices. Choose a variety of colorful vegetables. So that's to get all your nutrients, your vitamins and minerals. So if you eat only zucchini every day, you're going to get the nutrients that a zucchini has, but you're missing out on what broccoli has or sweet potato. Make half your grains whole grains every day. I'm going to talk a little bit about whole grains. And then protein choices on this plan can include seafood, beans, peas, nuts, beef, eggs. They emphasize lean protein or lean meats as much as possible. And try to move to low-fat or fat-free dairy or non-dairy calcium-fortified beverages. So the main reason we encourage dairy or milk, especially with children, is for that calcium. So if you want to get that calcium from a fortified, soy milk or almond milk or oat milk or rice milk, you can do that. Just make sure it's fortified. And I think all the meal patterns we're talking about do try to encourage whole grains, and that is because this is, I think, supposed to be a whole wheat kernel. In its whole form, it has a bran outer shell, which is to protect the grain. It has a germ center, which has vitamins and phytochemicals and antioxidants. And then it has the endosperm, which is kind of the soft, starchy part of the grain, and that's what you'll get if you eat white bread. Okay, that's the soft, starchy part of the grain. But when you have white bread, it's been stripped of the bran, it's stripped of the germ. And although they fortify breads, they fortify back, with B vitamins and iron, it's not the same as eating a whole grain because there's phytochemicals and antioxidants that were lost when they processed the grain. You can't replace those. So there's a lot of studies that show decreased risk for type 2 diabetes and heart disease in individuals who, in general are eating more whole grains. So that's kind of the push, or the reason behind the push for whole grains. If you go to, I like to go to the Harvard website. They have a very similar meal pattern or meal, suggested way of eating to MyPlate. They're a little bit, they have some other little specific things in there, but I like to kind of just compare. They also have some information there on Mediterranean diet, which we're going to talk about. But you're going to see there's a lot of, there's more similarities between all these diets than there's differences. Some are probably just a little bit more specific, like the DASH diet. This was done in clinical trials, so they had very specific amounts of fruits and vegetables and other foods that they fed the participants in the study. So they got really good data from that. And it was developed to test the effects of modifying the diet on lowering blood pressure. And they found that the DASH diet pattern does lower blood pressure if it's followed. It emphasizes potassium, calcium, and magnesium-rich foods, which naturally help lower blood pressure. And the other heart-healthy points to it are it's reduced in saturated fat, it suggests limiting red meat and sweets and beverages containing added sugars. So you're starting to hear a pattern here. But to get the therapeutic benefits of the DASH diet, the participants were eating 5 to 9 servings a day of fruits and vegetables, 2 to 4 servings daily to dairy products as to get the calcium, and they were also limiting their sodium to less than 2,300 milligrams per day. Now, if you have diabetes, I would say get more of those 5 to 9 servings should be more vegetables than fruits. So, if you can still have fruit, 3 servings a day, but maybe have, get the rest of those servings from vegetables, since they'll be lower in carb. So I would say in that if you're aiming for 5 to 9, make more of the servings vegetables. And you could still incorporate some fruit, but I would probably, if you have diabetes, have less fruit servings in the day. So let's say maybe you have 2 servings of fruit and the other, let's say you're able to get 7 servings in a day, which would be good. Maybe 5 of those servings are vegetable and 2 are fruit. So they group them together because fruits and vegetables are a good source of potassium, so that's why they're kind of lumped together like that. But I would probably lean more towards vegetables if you have diabetes. I don't know if you've ever seen U.S. News and World Report. Every January they have a panel that picks the best diets. And best overall diet this year was Mediterranean diet, which we're going to talk about next. But the DASH diet came in second, and in other years it's come in first. So I don't know why it fell to second place this year. But they look at heart health, balanced. Is it easy to follow? Is it something you can, sustain and so they look at all those factors, and so the DASH diet was ranked as number 2. So the nutrients that they targeted in the DASH trial, they restricted sodium. And if, think about it, if you're eating 5 to 9 servings a day of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, once you've eaten all that, and if you're probably eating more food at home if you're also eating that kind of pattern, so it's probably easier to limit your sodium. You're not eating out if you're eating that many fruits and vegetables. So it really does encourage you to eat at home more. It could be a little more expensive if you're buying a lot of fruits and vegetables. You know, there is that potential, but there's also a lot of different vegetables. So if you're eating in season, and you know, you can definitely budget that way. So the amount of potassium that they were trying to achieve in the study was about more than 3,500 milligrams per day. So a typical like high potassium fruit, like say an orange, has somewhere between 300 and 400 milligrams of potassium. So you have to eat, that's why you have to eat so many servings to really hit that 3,500 milligrams of potassium. The calcium that's, you know, that was beneficial in the study, you can get from dairy, or you can get it from other, you know, calcium fortified foods as well. And the magnesium you can get from dark green leafy vegetables, whole grains, and also legumes. On the subject of sodium, since, you know, the DASH diet really, the emphasis behind the study was to look at its effects on blood pressure. But then, you know, they did also see heart health benefits and weight loss also from the DASH diet. But if you are trying to reduce your sodium intake, on the DASH diet, the more therapeutic amount was less than 1,500 milligrams per day, which is what is recommended for some high-risk groups. But to achieve that, you really have to be limiting your, you know, things like if you're cooking at home, really limit any, you know, salt in cooking, condiments, any processed or packaged food, like, you know, like canned food. So just to give you sort of some guidelines, if you can choose, if you are using canned products or packaged foods, try to choose those that have less than 300 milligrams sodium per serving. It's not really considered low sodium though, unless it has less than 140 milligrams sodium per serving. Doing things like rinsing and draining products can remove a little bit of the sodium if it's, say, a canned bean, but it won't remove, you know, all of it. But that can help for sure if you're using like a canned vegetable. And then there are more and more products now in the market labeled, you know, low sodium, sodium free, reduced sodium. So look for those too if you're watching your sodium. Then I mentioned that the next meal pattern is Mediterranean. And this reflects, it's not as specific as the DASH diet. And it really can vary a little bit because it's referring to a region where there's different countries and different foods. And they don't all eat the same, but there are some similarities between the countries. But it's referring to the cuisine of countries along the Mediterranean Sea. So it's not as well defined as the DASH diet, but in general, people in that region eat, or unless their patterns have been changing, but in the past, they ate a lot of fruits and vegetables, they ate a lot of fatty fish, they didn't eat a lot of red meat, and if they did, it was probably more lean. So they ate small amounts if they had meat. They used a lot of monounsaturated fat from olive oil and canola. They ate nuts. And in some of the countries, there was modest or moderate consumption of alcohol from red wine. This organization, Old Ways, has partnered with Harvard University, and they came up with a Mediterranean pyramid, or Mediterranean diet pyramid, which you can, you know, look up if you're interested. It kind of, you know, showcases the foods that are part of the Mediterranean diet, and it also really encourages exercise and activity, which the other plans don't emphasize as much, but this one does. And you can see, you know, at the top are things like sweets and desserts and red meats. So some main points about the Mediterranean style of eating: it's not necessarily low fat, but the percent of calories from saturated fats is lower. And there's more intake of monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, which, just to remind you, are heart-healthy fats. It's lower in dairy and red and processed meat than the DASH diet and MyPlate. So in general, it's lower in dairy. It's higher in olive oil and higher in seafood. And again, this is not it's not something you have to do, but it does have intake of red wine in moderation if consumed. And so, like I said, Mediterranean diet was ranked #1 by US News and World Report this year. Again, looking at I think one of the factors they look at is it, good for diabetes or diabetes friendly? And this is kind of what a Mediterranean dinner plate could look like. So there's grains, olive oil, seafood, and not a lot of red meat. May also look like this. So again, it just depends on the country along the Mediterranean that you might be looking at or visiting. There needs to be more, because it's not a real specific diet like the DASH diet, there's probably more studies that need to be conducted to really say, how much of each nutrient is recommended. But many studies that have already been published suggest that adherence to a Mediterranean eating pattern is associated with reduced risk for cardiovascular disease and stroke. So it's something to, consider. But more studies, I'd say, would be needed before we, can't really say exactly how many servings from each. What I think you can take away from tonight, too, is that you can incorporate some of the good things from each of these eating patterns, what you like and what works for you. So another heart-healthy eating pattern is vegetarian, but there's a lot of variations. So there's vegan, which avoids all animal products. No meat, no fish, no egg, no dairy. In our hospital, we have every variation you could think of. When we have some patients come in, we have lacto-vegetarians who consume dairy, but otherwise no other food of animal origin. Lacto-ovo-vegetarian consumes dairy and egg, but otherwise vegetarian. Then we have pesco-vegetarians. My daughter's a pesco-vegetarian. She'll eat seafood, but she doesn't eat any other kind of meat. Then there's the term flexitarian, which refers to someone who eats a lot of vegetarian meals, but occasionally will indulge and have maybe a meat meal or have chicken or fish. And then there's also a plant-forward style of cooking or eating, which emphasizes, the vegetable or the grain or should be the star of the plate. And meat can be included, but it's not the main part of the entree. So these are all variations of vegetarian eating. The pattern includes predominantly vegetables, fruits, whole grains. So in its healthiest version, it includes all these things, and also seeds and nuts, and protein from legumes. And again, some variations may also include dairy or egg. So there could be, sources of cholesterol or saturated fat there if you are including dairy or egg or fish. So there are some studies that show benefits to lowering your LDL, cholesterol, and blood pressure and body weight with following a vegetarian eating pattern. The only, thing I would say is that eating vegetarian is not necessarily healthy if you are eating, say, processed grains, sweets, instead of whole fruit, you're eating, consuming more juice, or eating French fries every day instead of other kind of vegetables. So there are probably some, definitely healthy ways to eat vegetarian and other ways that really don't necessarily reduce your risk for heart disease. So kind of keep that in mind if you are trying to adopt more of a vegetarian eating pattern. And some of the vegetarian meat substitutes, because there are a lot on the market now, they might be highly processed, so they may have a lot of sodium. They may have a lot of fat. So you want to really be kind of critical looking at those ingredients and the nutrition fact label and decide, do I want to, use that, or do I want to, make my own lentil burger at home, or, decide if it's a good choice for you or not. The reason there's an emphasis in all of the meal patterns to include your vegetables and fruits are they offer vitamins, antioxidants, coenzymes that are needed in the body for reactions. There's phytochemicals which may have anti-cancer benefits. They offer fiber, which a lot of studies show may lower heart disease risk, and also help with satiety. So if you are trying to lose weight or you're trying to reduce your portion of rice on the plate, having more vegetables there is going to help fill you up, so maybe you can achieve some weight loss. So eating more vegetables is a good strategy if you're trying to lose weight. And then there's different types of fiber in vegetables. We have the soluble type, which may help with lowering cholesterol, and then the insoluble type, which is kind of like the scrub brush, and it helps sort of clean out the digestive system. Now, you may also know or have read about the anti-inflammatory effect of fruits and vegetables and plant foods. So I listed here some of the anti-inflammatory vegetables and fruits. And you really can't go wrong eating fruits and vegetables, especially if they are in their whole form. But you can also get benefits from herbs, fresh herbs, from nuts and almonds. Dark chocolate, wine, green tea all have anti-inflammatory effects on the body. And what we see is pro-inflammatory are some of the same things that all the meal patterns tell you to limit, which are saturated fats, trans fats, hydrogenated oils, processed carbohydrates, and excessive consumption of foods that have added sugars or sugar-sweetened beverages, etc. Now, the American Heart Association has their own heart-healthy eating pattern, and it's pretty similar to the other eating patterns that we've talked about. They are a little bit more specific about like ounces of meat per day. They really emphasize calories in must balance with energy out so you don't gain weight. So that's, so they do put some emphasis on exercise. Also emphasizing whole vegetables, whole fruits, only lean meats, trimming off any visible fat before you cook, poultry without skin. So those are all cooking, methods that will lower the saturated fat before you cook it. Fat-free or low-fat dairy or non-dairy products. Nuts and seeds are allowed. Again, avoiding the trans fats, saturated fats, and in place of saturated fats, substituting those heart-healthy oils. And they all pretty much agree on limiting sweets and added sugar. So, the Heart Association have a stand on added sugars now because a lot of studies show that added sugars increase inflammation in the body, increase blood pressure, can increase your triglycerides. So they have a line now that tells you how much added sugar is in that product. So if you're looking at two yogurts, you can now side by side compare and decide, okay, do I want this brand or this brand? Which one has less added sugar? And so as a consumer, that gives you more information. Before, it was just maybe in the ingredients, but you didn't know how much was added. And that's, again, what a heart-healthy plate can look like. And what I wanted to include were some online resources for you. The first one, the DASH diet, it's an app online to rate your plate, so you can put in what you're, kind of like a food record of what you ate for the day, and it will give you feedback if you are meeting the recommendations for the DASH diet. There's information online about the Mediterranean diet and way of eating. At Choose My Plate, I mentioned if you go there, you can enter your age, gender, and activity level, and it will give you some suggested calorie levels to follow and meal plans. And you can also online track your weight, track your eating, and track your progress with changing your eating patterns with this super tracker at Choose My Plate. So there's a lot of good online resources too. And then of course there's American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association. They also have websites with recipes and also information on eating heart healthy as well. So there's lots of resources out there. So that's my talk. Thank you.